I looked at the man I loved, his hands shaking, his voice cold. You lied to me. Your sister told me everything about your baby. My throat tightened, not because of the accusation, but because I had promised never to tell the truth, not until she forced me to. So I stepped aside and opened the nursery door. And when my sister saw the baby's eyes, she dropped to her knees. Ayira and Mbali grew up in the same small house in Nairobi, raised by their aging grandmother. The world saw Mbali first. She had a voice that filled a room, laughter that pulled people in, and beauty that made heads turn wherever she went. Teachers adored her confidence. Neighbors spoke her name with pride. Even their grandmother, though she tried to love them both equally, often gave Mbali the better plate, the warmer blanket, the louder praise. Ayira was the quiet one, the one who read books under the bed covers and stayed up late helping clean after guests had left. She watched more than she spoke, and she listened more than she was heard. But behind those watchful eyes was a girl with a heart full of loyalty and a mind sharp as glass. She wasn't loud. She didn't need to be. She was just real. Mbali basked in attention, but Ayira knew how to give it. Mbali was followed, but Ayira was trusted. And as the years went by, something began to shift, slowly, silently. People came to Ayira with their secrets. Strangers told her things without knowing why. She had a calm that felt like safety. And when Ayira met Tajiri, a kind, humble entrepreneur, love found her. That was the one thing Mbali had never expected. She'd been admired, chased, even obsessed over, but never deeply, gently loved. Not like the way Tajiri looked at Ayira. It lit a fire she couldn't put out. Mbali never said anything out loud, but Ayira could feel it. The way her sister's eyes lingered too long when Tajiri spoke, the way she interrupted conversations that weren't hers. She smiled too much, laughed too hard, touched his arm like it meant nothing, but Ayira knew better. Still, Ayira didn't fight. She never competed. That wasn't her way, because deep down, she believed something Mbali never did, that being loved for who you truly are is more powerful than being praised for who you pretend to be. But jealousy doesn't knock before it enters, and the shadow Ayira had grown used to standing in was about to grow darker. Ayira met Tajiri at a tech conference in Nairobi. It wasn't some fairy tale moment, no flashing lights or love at first sight, but it was quiet, powerful, and real. He noticed her ideas first, the way she explained a concept like it came from her soul, and she noticed his calm energy, the way he didn't try to impress, but still did. They exchanged numbers, then coffee, then long walks under city lights where laughter grew into something steady and strong. It didn't take long before they knew. They were planning a future together, talking about which apartment to move into, what color they'd paint the walls, and how many bookshelves Ayira would need. Tajiri respected her. He listened when she spoke. He saw the value in her silence. For the first time in Ayira's life, someone chose her, not because she tried to shine, but because she didn't. Mbali started visiting more. She acted like the loving sister, always bringing gifts, always calling Tajiri brother-in-law with a playful smile. But Ayira saw it, the way Mbali dressed a little bolder when he was around, how her stories got longer, louder, more dramatic. She'd brush past him in the hallway, laughing too hard at his jokes, watching him too closely when she thought no one noticed. Ayira didn't say anything. She trusted Tajiri, and more than that, she knew her worth. But the air started changing. The warmth in the room dimmed a little every time Mbali walked in, and Ayira started to wonder, was this just old jealousy or something deeper? Then one evening, everything cracked. Tajiri pulled Ayira aside after dinner. His face looked different, distant, confused. He held her hand, but there was a stiffness in his fingers. "I need to ask you something," he said quietly. "Mbali told me something today, something big." Ayira's stomach turned. She said, "You've been hiding a child, that you weren't honest about your past." Silence fell like glass shattering on the floor. Ayira didn't cry. She didn't scream. She looked into his eyes, the man she loved, and realized something far worse than betrayal had happened. He believed it. Ayira stood frozen for a moment. The air sucked from the room. The words Tajiri just said echoed in her mind. "Mbali told me you're hiding a child, that you lied about being a virgin." Her heart pounded, but not from guilt, from shock, from hurt, from the cruel twist that her sister had thrown into her life. She looked at Tajiri, hoping to see hesitation, some flicker of trust. But instead, all she saw was doubt. That look cut deeper than any insult ever could. She opened her mouth, trying to gather the right words. "I haven't lied to you, Tajiri," she said softly. "There's no child I've hidden from you. And I don't owe anyone a story about my past, like it's some courtroom testimony. But I'm telling you, this isn't true." But he just stared, lips pressed into a tight line, arms folded like a judge waiting for more proof. That silence spoke louder than anything he'd ever said. Ayira felt something shift inside her, a quiet decision. She didn't beg, she didn't argue. Instead, she took a deep breath and stepped back. "If you believe her," she said, voice calm, "maybe you're not mine to keep." She walked out of his apartment that night with her shoulders straight, her chin high, not because she didn't care, but because she knew she had to protect something bigger than her own heartbreak. There was truth buried deep in her chest, and if she was going to survive this betrayal, not just from her sister, but from the man who claimed to love her, she needed a plan. As she stepped into the cold Nairobi night, Ayira didn't cry. The tears could wait. What she needed now was clarity and silence. She pulled out her phone, opened an old message thread, and stared at the name. Mbali, the same sister who once begged her for help, who had cried in her arms when the world turned its back, was now the same one trying to destroy her life out of jealousy. Ayira exhaled. This wasn't over. She wasn't done being silent to protect lies. Not anymore. It was a cold, quiet night 2 years ago when Mbali showed up at Ayira's door. She was shaking, soaked from the rain, and her eyes were wide with fear. She didn't speak at first, just collapsed onto the couch and buried her face in her hands. Ayira rushed to her, confused, heart racing. "Mbali, what happened?" When Mbali finally spoke, her voice cracked. "I'm pregnant," she whispered. "And it's not just that. The father's married. He's got a whole family." Her words fell heavy between them. Ayira froze, shocked. Mbali had always lived fast, loved attention. But this was different. This wasn't drama. This was crisis. Tears streamed down Mbali's face as she explained everything, the affair, the promises the man made, and how he disappeared the moment she told him she was expecting. "I can't have this baby," she said. "Not like this. What will people say? What will our family say?" Ayira sat silently, trying to process it all. Her sister had made a mistake, yes, but behind all that fear, Ayira still saw someone broken, someone desperate. Mbali looked up at her and pleaded, "Just for a while. Please, help me. Keep her. Say she's yours. I'll figure things out later." It should have been a no. It should have been, "This isn't my responsibility." But Ayira had never known how to say no to Mbali, not when she was hurting. So, with trembling hands, Ayira nodded. "Okay," she said, "I'll do it. But this secret, it'll change everything." And it did. From that moment, Ayira's life became a silent sacrifice. She took on the role of mother, registering the birth under her name, caring for the child, waking up at night to feed and soothe. While Mbali went abroad to clear her head, Ayira stayed behind, holding the weight of someone else's choices. People whispered, family side-eyed, strangers judged. But Ayira stayed quiet, never telling a soul, because she had made a promise, not just to Mbali, but to that little baby girl who didn't ask for any of this. That night, Ayira didn't just become a mother in silence. She became the shield, the secret keeper, and she never forgot who put her there. Ayira walked into the small courthouse with her heart pounding. She held the baby close to her chest. Little Zawadi, barely a few weeks old, wrapped in a yellow blanket. The name meant gift, and that's exactly what she was, even if the world would never understand. With trembling hands, Ayira signed the papers. She became Zawadi's legal mother, even though she hadn't given birth to her. And as the ink dried, so did the last bit of her old life. Mbali had already left, off to another country, to reset and find herself, as she said. Ayira never expected a thank you, and she didn't get one. But she did get long nights with a crying baby, early mornings with diaper bags, and an endless stream of questions from neighbors and family. When did she get pregnant? With who? She was always the quiet one, maybe too quiet. She heard it all, the whispers, the stares in the market. Even their grandmother, once proud of Ayira's good behavior, now barely spoke to her. No one asked her for the truth. They'd already decided what it was. But Ayira never broke. She held her head high and focused on the tiny hands in her arms, the eyes that followed her every move, the soft smile that made sleepless nights worth it. Zawadi didn't know the weight of the world around her. She only knew Ayira's arms were home. Ayira worked twice as hard, taking freelance jobs, skipping meals to make sure Zawadi had what she needed, and attending parenting workshops when no one was looking. She poured everything she had into being the mother Zawadi deserved. Every giggle, every new word Zawadi learned was a quiet victory. But in her heart, Ayira carried a secret like a stone, Mbali's secret. A truth that wasn't hers to tell, but one she lived with every day. There were moments she wanted to scream it out loud, just once, to make people stop judging her, but she didn't, because she had made a promise. And for Ayira, promises were sacred, even the ones that cost her everything. Ayira stood in the kitchen, pretending to stir tea she had no intention of drinking. Her heart was heavy, but her face was calm, too calm. Mbali was visiting, sitting on the couch like she owned the air in the room. She laughed, complimented the curtains, pretended to care, but Ayira saw through it. After all, it hadn't even been a week since Tajiri left, broken by lies that Mbali planted. Lies Ayira had swallowed in silence to protect a truth too painful to say out loud. But today wasn't about screaming or fighting. It was about letting the truth speak for itself. Zawadi ran into the room with her little pink dress and bright beaded braids bouncing. "Mama!" she shouted, her face lighting up as she jumped into Ayira's arms. Mbali's smile faltered. The moment was sharp, almost surgical. She tried to recover, asking about school, faking interest in the drawing Zawadi proudly held up. But her eyes kept wandering. They studied Zawadi's face a little too long, her smile a little too closely. Something was stirring behind Mbali's lashes. Fear, guilt, recognition. Ayira watched in silence. She didn't need to say a thing. Zawadi clung to her mother with the innocence only children have, unaware of the storm of betrayal swirling just inches above her tiny head. Mbali tried to change the subject. "So, are you okay? After everything?" she asked, her voice syrup-sweet. Ayira placed Zawadi on the carpet and met her sister's gaze with the quiet fire only a woman deeply hurt can hold. "You came into my home. You smiled in my face. And then you tried to ruin the one good thing I had left." Mbali's eyes darted to the floor. Ayira didn't yell. She didn't break. She just walked over to the cabinet, pulled out a small white envelope, and laid it gently on the table. Inside, the test results waited. But Ayira didn't need them. Not really. She already had the only confirmation she needed. A child who knew exactly who her real mother was, and a sister who couldn't even look her in the eye. Dinner was quiet, too quiet, the kind of silence that wraps around the table like a heavy fog. Ayira served the food with steady hands, but her eyes stayed on her sister. Mbali sat across from her, trying to pretend everything was normal. She smiled, complimented the rice, even asked Zawadi about school. But there was a stiffness in her voice, a tension behind her eyes. Zawadi, bubbly as ever, looked up mid-bite and pointed at Mbali with a wide grin. "Auntie Mbali, you laugh like me," she giggled. That moment, just 5 innocent words, changed everything. Mbali's fork clattered to her plate. Her eyes locked onto the little girl's face, and something in her shattered. It was undeniable. Zawadi's smile, that same dimple on the left cheek, the shape of her eyes, the slight curve of her nose. She wasn't looking at just any child anymore. She was looking at a mirror of her younger self. Her hands trembled. She looked to Ayira for some kind of explanation, but none came, just silence. Ayira slowly stood up, walked over to the counter, and picked up a small white box. She returned to the table, set it down in front of Mbali, and sat back in her chair, calm but unblinking. "You wanted the truth," she said softly. "Now hold it." Mbali stared at the box, afraid to touch it. Her fingers hovered just above it, but she couldn't bring herself to lift the lid. The silence grew louder. Zawadi kept humming, blissfully unaware of the tension tightening around her like a rope. Finally, Mbali whispered, You tested her?" Ayira's voice didn't shake. "I had to. Not for me. For her. Because someday she'll ask, and she deserves the truth. Even if it burns." Mbali looked like she might collapse. Tears gathered, but didn't fall. Her mouth opened to speak, but there were no words strong enough. No lies left to spin. Across the table, Zawadi reached for another spoonful of rice, happy and safe, still calling Ayira Mama. And in that moment, Mbali understood. The truth was no longer just in a box. It was in the child's face, and the eyes never lie. Mbali sat frozen, her eyes still locked on the DNA test box, as if it had burned her fingers. Her breath became short and sharp, panic slowly rising to the surface. Then, out of nowhere, the dam broke. She slammed her hand on the table and stood up, shouting, "It was a mistake! I didn't mean for it to happen like this!" Her voice cracked as she cried, wild and broken. "I wasn't ready! I was scared, Ayira! I didn't know what to do!" Ayira didn't move. Her face stayed calm, but her eyes were steel. She had cried all her tears long ago, cried them in silence while rocking a baby that wasn't hers. Now, she had nothing left to offer. No comfort, no softness, only truth. She stood slowly, walked around the table until she stood face to face with her sister, then spoke in a voice so steady it cut through the storm. "You weren't ready to be a mother," she said, "but you were ready to ruin mine." Mbali staggered back as if the words physically hit her. She reached out, maybe for forgiveness, maybe just to feel less alone, but her hand dropped before it made it halfway. That's when Zawadi, so small, yet so full of light, looked up from her spot on the floor. Her tiny feet padded across the room. She wrapped her arms around Ayira's leg and said softly, "Mama, don't be sad." Ayira looked down and smiled for the first time that evening. A quiet, tired smile, but real. She ran her fingers through Zawadi's curls. The child looked up at her like she was the sun. Mbali watched from the side, her arms limp at her sides. Her tears kept falling, but no one rushed to wipe them. She tried to speak again, but her voice was gone. All she could do was watch the daughter she gave away find safety in another woman's arms. The sister she tried to destroy. The truth had finally come to light. And now, Mbali was the one standing in the shadows, alone with her lies. Tajiri sat on the edge of his bed, phone in hand, staring at the message Mbali had just sent him. "I lied. The child is mine. Ayira only protected me." He read it again and again. Each word dug deeper, colder. He remembered Ayira's face when he confronted her. The way her eyes filled, not with guilt, but with pain. The way she didn't fight back. The way she walked away with her head held high. But her heart shattered in silence. Shame crept into his chest like slow poison. He had believed a lie from someone who had always played games. And he had doubted the woman who had only ever loved him with everything she had. He couldn't stay still. He got in his car and drove, rehearsing apologies in his head, praying she'd hear him out. When Ayira opened the door, she didn't look surprised, just calm, like someone who had already buried the past and moved on. "I know the truth now," Tajiri said softly, eyes heavy with regret. "I know I was wrong. I should have trusted you. I'm so sorry, Ayira. I still love you." There was a long pause. Ayira stepped back slightly, not to invite him in, but to create space between them. Her voice was gentle but unshakable. "If you believed a lie over my soul," she said, "you were never my future." Tajiri's mouth opened to speak, but nothing came out. Ayira didn't raise her voice. She didn't cry. She didn't need to. Her silence was louder than anything he could have imagined. Behind her, Zawadi ran across the hallway, laughing as she held a drawing she had made. Ayira turned and smiled at her, a real smile, soft and warm, the kind Tajiri hadn't seen in months. He realized then, Ayira had already found her peace, and it didn't include him anymore. As the door gently closed between them, he stood there, holding the weight of his mistake. Some truths don't need to scream. They just walk away and never look back. Ayira never looked back after closing that door. She poured everything she had into raising Zawadi, not as a burden, but as a blessing. The pain of betrayal became her strength. The lies that tried to crush her only made her voice louder, her purpose clearer. She watched Zawadi grow into a kind, sharp, joyful little girl who asked a million questions and gave a million hugs. Every time someone called Ayira Mama, it felt like the world finally saw what her heart had always known. But Ayira wanted more than just healing for herself. She wanted to create a space for other children like Zawadi, children born in secret, children abandoned, children judged by the sins of others. So she launched the Zawadi Foundation, a home, a school, and a future for every hidden child across Kenya. She knocked on doors. She spoke at events. She used her story not as shame, but as power. And people listened. Donations flowed in. Volunteers showed up. Hope spread like wildfire. On the day of Zawadi's school assembly, the hall was packed with proud parents. But no one clapped louder than Ayira when Zawadi stepped onto the stage to receive her award for most kind-hearted student. After the applause, Zawadi spotted Ayira in the crowd, her eyes lighting up. She ran straight into her arms, laughing. "You're the best mama in the whole world!" she shouted. Ayira held her tight, tears stinging her eyes, not from sadness, but from something deeper, peace, completion. And as the camera faded out, her voice echoed in the background. "I raised her in silence. I protected her in shadows. But now the world will know she was always mine." This wasn't just about revenge or truth anymore. This was legacy. This was love. This was a mother who refused to let the world define her, or her child. If this story moved you, don't just scroll. Share your thoughts in the comments. Would you have kept the secret like Ayira? Repost to your story. Someone out there needs to hear this today. Double tap if you believe real mothers are made by love, not just blood. Follow for more jaw-dropping, emotional African stories that deserve to be heard.